start with the view. In the end, the view of an Angular component is its template, you could say. So that's the view of the component. And all the elements that are in that template file here are part of that Angular view. Now, content, on the other hand, is any content that might be projected into a view with ng content. Should be relatively simple to remember because it's called ng content. So anything that's projected into a component or into the template, into the view of a component, any content that is projected here is referred to as content. And these hooks here simply execute once any projected content has been initialized. So here you could access that content and get information about it. And this hook here, this checked hook, is executed whenever the content has been checked by Angular's change detection mechanism. And I'll say right away that you'll probably not use these hooks too often, but if you do have some logic that should execute whenever the projected content might have changed, you could use these hooks to run that logic. Now for viewInit and viewChecked, it's the same, but now for this component's template. So here it's not about any projected content, but instead it's about the template that belongs to this component, which includes the projected content, but which also includes all the other elements that are in that template. And here again, the first hook, the viewInit hook, is executed once Angular is done initializing this component's view. So in the end, once it rendered it to the real DOM, you could say. And ng after viewChecked will then be executed whenever Angular performed change detection for this component's view. So when it checked whether some UI updates are needed because of some possible data changes. Again, you probably won't need these hooks too often, but that is what they're about, or when they're being invoked. And ng on destroy then is invoked right before this component instance is about to be thrown away, for example, because the component is rendered conditionally and the condition is no longer met. That's what these lifecycle hooks are about. Now, in the official documentation, you'll also see some other methods being mentioned here, and I'll get back to them later in this section. And in general, you'll of course see some of these hooks, the most important hooks, in action again and again throughout this course. For now, that was just a deep dive to get you started with these hooks so that you have a first idea of what they are about. As mentioned, there are quite a few hooks which you will very likely never need. But nonetheless, it is important to know about them, and it's important to understand what they're about and in which order they execute. And with all that, we can go back to our main project, and there I now just also added a console log statement to ng on init so that we can see when that runs in the server status component. And I added this ng after viewInit hook with a log so that we also see that run here. You, of course, don't have to do that. Instead, we're now going to continue working on that project, but to also add some lifecycle hooks here, I added these two, or this log and this one to be precise. And with that, let's now dive back into this project. So now that we had a thorough first look at all these lifecycle hooks and these methods you can add to your Angular components, we'll move back to the main project, though you'll see some of these hooks in action throughout this course and also later in this section. I'll also get back to after next render and after render later. But one hook I actually want to add to our main project right away, right now, is the ng on destroy hook, because we got a use case for that in our project. Now, to make sure I don't have any typos, I'll implement on init and on destroy separated by a comma. And on destroy must be imported from @Angular core. And with it imported, I then have to add the ng on destroy method here. By the way, the order of the methods does not matter. The order is up to you. But now here in ng on destroy, we can do cleanup work we might want to perform right before the component is gone, so to say. Now here in my application, this component is actually never gone. We can't switch to other pages and we're not rendering it conditionally, so it's always there. But for some components that might be different. And since I'm setting up an interval here, and we might in the future use this component such that it may disappear, it is a good idea to clean up that interval whenever that component is removed. Because even though if that's not the case yet here in this application, that might change in the future. And if you have an interval that keeps on going behind the scenes, even though the component is gone, you have a memory leak in your application, and you can have a negative impact on the performance of your application, which no one wants, of course. That's why we should clean up our interval here with ng-on-destroy. Now, how can we do that? Well, setInterval returns a value of type Node.js timeout, which is basically an ID of the interval that's created here. So we can add a new private property, private since we don't need it in the template, and name it interval. And the type should be Node.js timeout or undefined. So I'll add this question mark here. And then we should set this interval here to the result of calling setInterval. Now we can use it in ng-on-destroy to remove it with help of the clear timeout method. To that we can pass this interval. So this ID which we stored in this interval property. And with that we're making sure that this interval gets cleaned up when the component is removed. Again, this component is never removed. Nonetheless, that is something you typically want to do to avoid potential memory leaks. Now, you might be getting an error here regarding this Node.js timeout thing, and if that's the case, you can replace this type with return type, which is a special type provided by TypeScript, angle brackets type of setInterval. Now that's a bit more advanced TypeScript code, and it's all TypeScript code. It has nothing to do with Angular, which simply means that the type of interval should be the type of value returned by setInterval. And with that, this error should go away, and the application should work as before, but now the interval is theoretically removed when that component is removed from the screen. So ng-on-destroy can be helpful. Angular actually also has an alternative to this ng-on-destroy method. A more modern alternative which won't work in older Angular versions. So if you're getting problems with the alternative I'm about to show you, you should simply use ng-on-destroy. But here I'll comment out ng-on-destroy and I'll get rid of that on-destroy interface, so that I'm not forced to add ng-on-destroy. And I'll get rid of that property, this interval property. Because now I'll use a different approach for cleaning up this interval. Angular allows you to inject a special value into your components. A so-called destroy ref, a destroy reference. And you can inject it with help of the constructor or with help of the inject function. The type you need to inject is destroy ref, which is imported from @Angular core, this thing here. Destroy ref is a class provided by Angular, and by injecting it and storing it in a property, you can set up a listener with help of that property and that injected value that will trigger a function whenever the component into which you injected destroy ref is about to be destroyed. And that's that alternative to ng-on-destroy I mentioned. So here, for example, we could now simply store our interval in a constant, which is only available in ng-on-init, because right after setting that interval, we can use destroy ref to call on destroy and register a function that will be executed by Angular when this component is about to be destroyed. And it's now in here where we could call clear interval and pass our interval constant to it. That interval constant is only available in ng-on-init, but that's also where I'm setting up this destroy listener. And you can use this and set up as many onDestroy listeners as you need in any methods of this component. You cannot just use it once. You can use it as often as you want. And that's therefore an elegant alternative to ng-on-init, which you also should know about. It's not available in older Angular versions, but if you are encountering an error related to destroy ref, you can simply use ng-on-destroy as an alternative.